Hi everyone, this is today's installment of the 1921 video series, and we have skipped forward one day to the 3rd of January 1921, which was a Monday, and the word skipped is equivocal in this instance because I've already done a video for the 2nd January 1921, but it was a while ago, so this is out of sequence, and the one we had previously, yesterday, was the 1st, and then on the 2nd, Dimitri spent the afternoon and the evening at the Villa Alam with his cousin Andrei and Andrei's wife Kshesinska, and yeah, so that's where he wakes up today. He says he always gives, in his adult diary entries, he always gives a place. In addition to the date and the day of the week, he gives a place. And he wrote this one in Monte Carlo, but he did not wake up in Monte Carlo. Okay, sometimes these are problematic because of the legibility or non-legibility of the handwriting. And in this instance, there is one sentence crammed into the bottom and right-hand side of a page, and so I'm just going to have to note that when I read these, and yeah, let you can see the context. So this, and Dmitri was very careful, very meticulous with his diary entries, careful in the sense of making sure they're organized. He had a weird organization system so far as chronology goes, but he wrote in his own page numbers, not using page numbers if there were page numbers in the diary volume himself. He wrote in his own. So these are pages 30 through 32, and the long diary entry that we just finished doing, those were pages 1 through, what was it, 23, I think. And now we're, pages 30 to 32. Okay, I'll dive in. I got up in Cap Dale around 9 o'clock and had breakfast with everyone, then went back to Monte Carlo at 12 o'clock. The weather was heavenly, amazingly warm and nice. When I arrived, I found Maria and the Polovtsovs at the hotel. We were joined by Dolly and May and wandered around in the garden. I'm attaching a picture of our group taken by a local photographer, and this is where there's a sentence with some words that I can't read. The words I can make are best of all, and then the name Billy. And then Dmitri writes a list of who was in the photo. So the photo included the Polovtsovs, Pete and Mimi, Dolly, Dmitri himself, Maria, and Billy. We'll get to Billy's identity in a minute. Okay, so page 31. I lunched à deux with Daisy de Segonzac, who, with her husband, strange though it seems, is living in a villa called Beaulieu. We lunched at Orest. Afterwards, I went to Saint Ramon, where May, Dolly, and Papa Dominic were having lunch. The entire company was tight. It turned out they'd been drinking vodka and sampling the wine. Around 4 o'clock, I went home and wrote. Gavril and Nina invited me to dinner here at the Hotel de Paris, and that dinner turned out to be the main reason for the drama I wrote a little about on page 19. Maria, Gulia, and the Polovtsovs were there. Also Shagubatov, who had just arrived to stay at Gavril's place. It was a very successful dinner, and afterwards we went to the casino where I lost. I went to bed rather early. Okay, so this is much different. So we had these very emotional, very candid diary entries, sort of soul-searching diary entries, or pages at the end of the long diary entry, and this is closer to the 1906 diary entries, where sometimes there's some emotional content for sure, but not always. Dmitri is definitely still depressed, and the reason I say that is because he writes very differently when he's not depressed. He's much livelier and has more to say, and he's not a difficult person to read in that respect, to gauge his mood. So the picture, he taped it or affixed it somehow onto the diary page, and so there's just a blank space where it was. And I have a copy of the picture, but when these were put onto microfilm, whoever did that took out all the photographs and put them at the end, photographed them after having photographed the actual pages of the diaries. And I always have a little anxiety about getting to those pictures, because I have this fear of the microfilm spool being pulled off the reader, and then it would be a real pain to manually have to put it back on the spool. And I had to do that once, and I put it on backwards. That was the first volume of the microfilm reels, the first reel. But I do need to digitalize those photos, absolutely. So when I've done that, I will certainly post that photo. Okay, so it's the usual people except Billy. So who is Billy? Well, Billy was actually Maria's dog. She got the dog while she was in London. She and Dmitri were both crazy about dogs, and they both sort of always had to have a dog at any given time if they possibly could. And Dmitri had actually gone through a couple of dogs when he was in London. One ran away, it was a chow, and one, I think Billy, am I right? I think Billy was a bull terrier that he had let off leash. I don't know why he did this. He let the chow off leash in Green Park in London, and it took off. And he went back and did this. It was found, and he went and got it at an animal shelter, and then he did the same thing again, and it took off again, and finally he decided that he had to give it to some English friends who lived out in the countryside. And then he got this bull terrier, and he let it off the leash in Green Park, and it immediately savaged this poor woman's little dog. And yeah, and you know, I think Maria ended up taking on Billy. I don't know. But anyway, I do know that Billy was a dog, and I think he was a bull terrier. He may or may not have been Dimitri's before he was Maria's. So with these words, best of all, then ... then Billy, you know, it probably he's saying that Billy was the best part of the photograph. Okay, so now we have a new person, and I had the wrong spelling of her name. I thought he was writing, because he wrote this in Latin letters, I thought he was writing a U instead of an N. And she has a complicated name, but I was able to find her and figure out who she was. So this was Daisy de Segonzac. I have no idea how to pronounce that name, or indeed where it came from. This was a French family, but they don't sound the name doesn't sound very French. So anyway, she was by birth Mathilde de Erlanger. They've got the de, but I think it was a German name. There were some members of the family who had German Christian names, and so she was called Daisy. She was born in 1885. So she was 6 years older than Dmitri, but she hadn't turned 36 yet. So she was 35, and she was married to Jean de Bardon de Segonzac, and he was a count and she was a countess. And there are multiple Derlingers, or however French, I don't know, French pronunciation, German pronunciation. It's a mixed name. And it was a very musical family. She was a member of that family, and the whole family pretty much is mentioned in the diaries between 1918 mostly and about 1924, and then later on they even are mentioned in the diaries, at least one or two of them in 1939, 1940. So that's interesting, and they were all musical. I mean, some of the brothers, one of the brothers was a composer, and another one was a musicologist, and so I wasn't surprised to find out that Daisy was musical too, and she wrote the music for a song called A Little Secret. The sheet music was published in 1932. It was published in Monte Carlo, and nowadays you would say it was self-published, because so the music was written by Daisy. Can't remember who wrote the lyrics. It was illustrated by another member of the family, another Segonzac with the initial L, and then it was published by Daisy, identifying herself as Comtesse Jean de Segonzac, using her husband's first name. And I looked to see if I could find any videos about her or any of her music on YouTube, and unfortunately I did not manage. Her husband was about 10 years older than her, and clearly Dmitri had met her through this family, and I don't know how he'd met the family, but they were an aristocratic French slash German family, and very impressive. There were scholars in the family, and as I said, it was a very musical family. So he has lunch with her, but typical for when he's in one of these moods, he doesn't say anything about her, except that he finds it strange that she and her husband are living in Monte Carlo. So they have lunch at Orest. I think this is his new favorite place. I'm quite certain it's mentioned in other diary entries over the years. And then when he gets to San Ramon, to the Polovtsov's villa, he finds the Radzivil's there and Medubasova, and they are all tight. So he uses a Russian slang word for drunk. And last time I translated that slang word as snockered. And then I talked about how I thought that was a bad choice because it sounds to me very much like just, American slang. It's probably 20th century American slang or whatever. So recently I've read several books by Evelyn Waugh about sort of the bright young things in London in the 1920s after the war, and he always uses the word tight as his euphemism for drunk. So Dmitri, belonging to that and having been in that time and place amongst the British nobility and aristocracy in London in 1919, 1920, that's, if he had written this in English, I guess that's probably the most likely word that he would have used. So he goes home and does his writing for the day, and then there's this dinner at his hotel, at the Hotel de Paris, but hosted by Gavril and Nina, and the usual people are there, except Andrei and Kshesinska are excluded, not by design, according to Dmitri, but because it was more or less of a, everybody was there in Monte Carlo, and they decided to get together and do this, and nobody thought about, asking the Andrei and Kshesinska to come from this unpronounceable place where they lived. Okay, sounds innocent anyway. But it causes this huge blow-up between Dmitri and Andrei. So Gavril, you're familiar with, if not from your own research and reading, then from Dmitri's 1906 diaries, that he and Dmitri, whenever Dmitri was living in Tsarskaya Selo, he and Dmitri saw a lot of each other. Gavril was older by several years, I think. And then Shagubatov, I've mentioned before because he's popped up before, was Dmitri's ADC, his adjutant, who turned up in Paris. and who seemed to be sort of voluntarily acting as Dimitri's assistant in some instances, not as a paid employee. And the fact that he was invited to stay at Gavril's villa with Gavril and Nina makes me think that he was, he was treated as more or less of an equal within the family, at least by Gavril. Dimitri never uses his Christian name. Shagubatov was the surname, strange one. And yeah, anyway, he's invited as a guest. And actually, I didn't translate it that way, but Dimitri's actual words were he was invited as a guest to stay at Gavril's. And maybe, he was in the same cavalry circles that Dimitri and Gavril had been in pre-revolutionary Russia, so he knew both of them. So Dimitri loses money. He almost always loses money when he's in a bad mood if he tries gambling. And yeah, just goes to bed early, calls it a day. Okay, so we will continue on with these until we are caught up. I'm sure we'll be skipping more of them. I should have looked ahead, because some of these diary entries, not just the diary entry of the second, but I think several of them we already covered. And as I mentioned in the previous one, Coco, and as you know, Coco comes in on the 22nd, and we're now on the 3rd of January. She comes in on the 22nd of January, but we will not be doing all of the intervening diary entries because we've already done them. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time. Bye.